Fate Zero is kind of great. In fact, I would say that it's the perfect version of itself. Forget about prequels, best girl SABER hype, Fate Stay night routes, erotic visual novels, high school teenage drama, absolute territory fetishes, and all of that stuff. At its core and on the surface, what the series is really about is a battle royale, where multiple characters face off and explores various types of ideologies, personalities, and themes through narrative, interaction, and of course, battles. That's what the show is, and I don't care about what you think. Okay, actually, that is not true at all. I would love to hear your thoughts on the matter. Just hit the comments, you know. Anyway, Fate Zero is pretty much a sports event with a bit more drama though. And if you think that it's just a show fueled by lovely animation and music, try comparing it to the later released Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blades works, a show equally as stunning but inferior in terms of writing. Nonetheless, in case you didn't know, I am really into this whole art being subjective thing. In fact, I love the idea and fact that different people view different pieces of media, well, differently. If that is not blunt enough for you, what I'm trying to convey here is that if you dislike Fate Zero, then that is just okay with me. I've read my fair share of complaints about the show, like how it can be overly expository, how it's too ambiguous, or how the ending is lackluster, and while I don't necessarily agree with those claims, I do understand and respect them. However, there is this one claim hovering around the internet, usually used in videos about what makes good fights in anime, that goes something like this. The fights in Fate Zero are unrealistic and boring because the characters just stand around and talk to each other. This idea floors me. It's just one of those that makes me want to ask, have you even watched the show? Which I know is a really annoying question to be asked. Nonetheless, I can't help but to find the claim completely wrong. So in this video, I'm going to lay out as clear as I can why the dialogue in the Fate Zero fight scenes makes complete sense, both in terms of pace, narrative, and the viewer's sense of time. Obviously, I won't have time to talk about every single fight in the show, so I've picked out two of the most popular ones, and those will just have to do this time around. If you want to argue that I have selected these two fights specifically to prove my point, just write a fight down below in the comments and I'll be happy to talk about that one with you as well. The first battle we'll look into is the one between Lancer and SABER in episode 4. The fight begins with the two of them taking their battle stances, presumably to observe the enemy instead of just mindlessly blasting into each other. As showcased by these close-ups of Lancer and Irie's reaction, the fight begins with Lancer trying to seduce SABER with his charm spell. Okay, he's not actually trying to do it, it just kind of happens because it's just kind of a mandatory effect, but you know what, that's not really the point. However, SABER is unaffected by this. Lancer then tries to provoke SABER by mentioning how she's a woman, and then he follows up with trying to confirm whether it is true that the SABER class of servants have a strong resistance of magic. But SABER doesn't bite, she just stays quiet. Instead of confirming anything, she changes the topic, asking Archer if he wants a fair fight, and after reporting, she goes in for the first physical blow. This quick exchange of words allows for Lancer to confirm that his charm doesn't work, as well as revealing something about Lancer's personality, that he is not above provoking his opponent. After the first exchange of blows has passed, they resume positions and take a few seconds staring each other down. This is not uncommon in professional fights. Surely if it's just a drunken brawl in a bar, then you would just fight until you pass out, but in fights like these, it makes perfect sense to take a few seconds to evaluate your opponent. SABER takes this time to try to decipher something pivotal to her victory. Which of the two lances is the noble PHANTASM? Obviously this cannot go on for too long, so this time Archer jumps in and, as a result of his cunning nature, he baitingly asks SABER what is wrong, teasing her about her being on the defensive. They clash for a third time, this time resulting in SABER landing a small hit on Lancer Lancer, who contemplates the length of her sword. After a fourth exchange, the two servants exchange a few lines about each other's strengths, but that's quickly interrupted by Lancer's master, who orders him to wrap up the fight. This little exchange of acknowledgement of each other reminds the viewers that the servants are not just robots or Pokemon fighting on behalf of their masters. They are real individuals who very well may have their own priorities and or interests in the battle. After a quick taunt by Lancer, he jumps into the fifth exchange, this time wounding Saber. After that, Saber switches gears and lifts herself of her armor to be lighter. You could ask the question why Archer is not attacking immediately, but if you look closely, you will see that he is slowly moving backwards. This is because he is setting a trap to counter Saber's next move with his noble phantasm, one that inflicts damage that cannot be healed. He is doing this because he noticed how Ari was healing Saber incredibly fast. So yes, he could storm Saber, but that damage would just be healed, and by luring her into a trap where she can be damaged by Lancer's noble phantasm, he'll have a much safer shot at victory. Nonetheless, they prepare to engage once again, but is interrupted by Ryder, and that is where the fight ends. Before moving on to the next fight, let's cover some questions that people may ask about a fight such as the one between Lancer and Saber. I think that when people claim that these fights are bad, there are usually a few misconceptions at hand. Please remember that the questions and answers I'm about to cover only take ground in this battle between Saber and Lancer, but they can be applied to pretty much any fighting scene. Anyway, let's try looking into it. Why would the characters in Fate Zero even talk at all? I mean, wouldn't the fight be more realistic if they just fought each other non-stop instead of stopping all the time? So while the fight definitely would be more bombastic this way, then I think it makes a lot of sense for the fighters to not just fight without talking. I've already mentioned how the servants aren't Pokemon, they're individuals with distinct and burstful personalities. And even if they're forced to fight, which they are not zombies, and thus they act as, well, people. And people can get curious, they ask questions, they tease each other. Look at it this way, imagine if you were dead. Okay, that's a really dark note to start on, but just go with it. Anyway, you're dead and then suddenly you're brought back to the world of the living to play, let's say rock, paper, scissors with Steve Jobs or Abraham Lincoln or Satoshi Kon or I don't know. Would you just plow through them and quickly go back to sleep, or enjoy the time in the world of the living, maybe even having some conversations with these famous people? Yeah, that's kind of my point. The characters also use dialogue as a strategic weapon, like how we saw Lancer provoking Saber. So yeah, there are plenty of reasons why they would talk without it being unrealistic. Nonetheless, this really relates to the next question, so let's just move on. Why are there so many staring contests? Why do the fighters just stand still and look at each other between exchanges? We've already talked about how it makes sense for the servants to talk, at least a little bit in the fight, so I'll try not to repeat those arguments. Now, I'm not an expert on hand-to-hand combat, but I don't think it is too far-fetched to say that when experienced fighters are battling each other, then it's not uncommon for them to, once a while take a step back from each other in an attempt to evaluate the current state of the battle. I imagine this could be in order to catch your breath or try to find an opening. But honestly, I'm not really that knowledgeable on all of that stuff, but what I can do is look at how the brief standoffs between the characters make sense in terms of the narrative, which they do, by the way. You see, in the universe of the Fate franchise, each servant has this item called a noble phantasm, which for all intents and purposes are just awesome weapons with magical powers. These powers can be, well, anything. In universe, we have seen noble phantasms with the ability to bend space and time. We have seen some that causes unfathomable amounts of damage, and we've even seen ones which literally breaks the rules of the game itself. What I'm trying to say here is that if you rush into an attack against a servant whose noble phantasm you don't know the power of, you could essentially be losing right then and there. In other words, it makes 110 complete sense to me that the servants would be extra careful when fighting each other, which both excuses introduces and explains why they would take breaks in between fights to analyze each other and strategize. Now for the last question. Why are the fighters just standing still while thinking a bunch of things during the battle? I hate this anime trope because they're really just standing still for a long time thinking a bunch of stuff. It's just unrealistic. Okay, so I might sound condescending here, but this is really just a common misconception. It's a normal trope in action anime that characters will have long inner monologues during fighting. However, they tend to be drawn out long enough for it to get quite funny, and that's why the trope has received its fair share of parodies. Anyway, what some viewers may not realize is that the characters are not actually standing still while thinking these thoughts in real time. The best way I can exemplify this is with this clip from one of the latest episodes of Dragon Ball Super, where you see Vegeta thinking about his family while being on the receiving end of an attack. This moment is directed pretty well because it specifically shows the enemy shooting the blast and then cuts to Vegeta thinking about his family. They even make an effort to show how fast the blast is going. Because of the fact that we see the blast being shot first and how fast it moves, the show is indirectly telling us that the things that Vegeta is thinking about is actually only happening for like a second before the blast hits. It makes sense because when people think, well, anything, we don't actually think the actual words. Many viewers tend to feel that the fights in Fate Zero lacks intention because they constantly pauses for the purpose of the fighters either thinking about something, talk to each other, or face off. And I think that's kind of okay. The fights between servants in Fate Zero are not meant to be brawls with characters just mindlessly punching and kicking each other. Those types of fights are usually fueled by adrenaline and yes, tension, so naturally that is what would be conveyed to the viewer. These fights, however, are more like strategic games rather than brawls. The characters engage for quick exchanges and then breaks up to evaluate, and so they continue until one wins, and we have already covered the many reasons why that is the best way to approach a fight in this situation. But that doesn't mean that Fate Zero doesn't deliver a couple of fights that is more about ruthless killing intent than tactical combat. And to cover that, we will look into a fight between masters this time, with Emiya KIRITSUGU versus Kotomine KIRIE. After a quick stare down, KIRIE launches forward for the first engage. KIRITSUGU shoots at KIRIE, who uses his knives as a shield and continues to dash forward. A shocked KIRITSUGU uses his time axle ability to dodge the attack and follows up with a barrage of bullets, which are dodged and repelled by KIRIE, and take this opportunity to evaluate each other's powers. Notice how none of them are actually talking, but both of them are thinking. Remember what we just talked about? How it's just a couple of seconds in real time? Good. After throwing away his knives, KIRIE jumps in and straight up punches KIRITSUGU right in the gut, crushing his heart, which propels him into a wall, spitting blood. KIRIE, believing he's won, turns around and walks off, but reacts when KIRITSUGU gets back up to shoot at him again. KIRIE jumps in fast, but KIRITSUGU is already busy time altering to land a sure hit, which KIRIE deflects with his freaking arm. The two of them takes a quick breath until KIRITSUGU uses time axle to engage with a knife this time, but KIRIE deflects the attacks with just one arm, but KIRITSUGU makes some distance with time axle and hits KIRIE with the knife in the knee, but KIRIE jumps straight ahead, propels himself towards his victim, who is getting ready to shoot him, and then the battle is interrupted by the grill. Holy shit! This battle is ferocious, with no talk or filler. While many of the fights in Fate Zero are directed as professional fighting tournament matches where the fighters exchange blows, break up and strategize, this one was more akin to a pack of wolves just trying to tear each other apart. What is impressive about this is how the same anime managed to deliver such different fights, and that just shows how the staff behind the production realizes what styles to use to showcase the characters in the best possible manner. Unlike the fights between servants, these two masters have no interest in communicating or learning anything from each other. They just want to take the other one down. However, I feel like I'm already fanboying a bit instead of actually focusing on the main point, which is to prove that the characters in Fate Zero don't just stand around and talk unrealistically during the fights. So I think I'll wrap it up here. There's still a ton of lovely fights in the show that I could cover, but I'll need you guys to tell me whether or not you'd be interested in having those fights covered in a future video. If not, then I will just move along to the next project. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, then don't forget to do all the things that you can do in order to support me, like sharing, liking, donating to my Patreon whenever that comes up, subscribing to the channel, clicking the bell and all of that stuff. If nothing else, then feel free to type a comment down below so we can continue this conversation right there. And now you will have to excuse me because I just watched a few episodes of Fate Zero to prepare for this video, and now I'm hooked again, so I want to rewatch the show immediately.